started in game development like 15, 20 years ago. Own studio, own Stratosphere games. We're 10 years old. By the way, just turned 10, so congratulations to ourselves. So we did for many years mainly social Web2 games, and then I discovered Web3. I've been on a panel, and I always was a bit against the whole concept of play to earn and everything, but then someone explained the ownership component and what it can bring for the users, and because I'm always user forward, I was becoming, I really become a believer. And so we do a game called Desolation. It's in the boardroom as well, with open loot. And it's a Web3 games that has some footing in Web2. And I think that will be one of the things is like how, so what we are talking about with onboarding is like Web2 or Web3, and or like basically how can we get the critical mass? I think that should be part of that discussion.
Yeah, it has been maybe 4 or 5 months that I've been seeing the last release of the game, so I definitely think it's going to be even better. But I remember playing the game without the Desolation, so everyone, as Chris said, you can play the game in the other room. I really encourage everyone to test the game because it's really good. I also remember being invited, and I'm not invited so much to be honest with you, but being invited in your studio in Germany to talk about Web3 and how you see things. It was 3 years ago, so it was a pleasure to see how you were convinced about the technology, but I would love you to also explain the kind of expectation, like you decided to believe in the ownership layer, but what kind of expectation you had before going into this new ecosystem in terms of onboarding? Did you already imagine the challenges you will face?
No, not at all. I mean, I think the key component is I'm coming from Web2, but I come not from classical console games. We did a lot of mobile free-to-play games. So free-to-play games have a wonderful thing is you can fuck up the launch, you can fuck up the hype. Because if you're doing a good job of good user acquisition, you can grow, you can live ops, you can make the game whole again. I have the feeling that's the only downside I have in Web3 is that the onboarding experience is also a lot of connected to hype, sadly. What I mean by that is, per se, I don't have anything against hyping up a game, but becoming basically one of the main drivers for a major onboarding element. I think it makes it much harder. You can't fuck it up that much. It's probably, especially when the games become more complex, I think that's one of the biggest challenges that a lot of Web3 games face when they are getting live, because there's hype, everyone wants to finally have the game in their hand, want to play it, and then it's a lot of times without a big budget, and you saw quite a few fail with that. It is so hard to basically stay true to the hype and do basically what you promised to do.
I think it would be interesting to also kickstart a conversation with the two of you, because we're talking about onboarding, and you two actually collaborate with each other, SKALE and Sequence, to actually avoid any friction with onboarding. So I would love you to explain what is this relationship between you and why it does make sense from the SKALE perspective and from Sequence to actually work together. So if we can start with you there.
Yeah, maybe I can start because I also want to comment on what you were saying, where I think when we talk about onboarding, there's a couple of different things. There's like developer education and onboarding into leveraging new technology, and then of course there's the player side of it as well. And as Chris is talking about, like the stakes are just higher in Web3 because you're giving people assets with not only the meaning that we would attach to any game item in any traditional sense, but also, potentially real world value. And things like the order in which it was minted, was mine earlier on the blockchain than someone else's. Those are things that are verifiable on the chain and ascribe new meaning potentially to players. Having that OG status is something that every player likes. And when you can actually verify that with on-chain information, that becomes really powerful. So, thinking about onboarding and building in a way that respects or sort of takes seriously the implications of what can go wrong and not being able to necessarily just like rebuild a server and make players whole again, it just becomes more serious. But there's obviously a lot of opportunities in that. And so, when we work with incredible ecosystems like SKALE, we tackled this problem, I think, jointly in as many ways as possible, because there is that layer of the developer experience, developer education, thinking through what logistical problems can be solved by blockchain technology, but also what creative opportunities there are for developers and players in that, as well as the actual developer economic benefits of what the blockchain can do. So there's a lot of education. There's a lot of advising and getting deep in game design, things like that. And then from there, it's really the actual technology integration and making sure that is built with not only sustainability of the game in mind, but also future-proofing. As you said, especially a free-to-play or like a live ops game, you're never done. And so what you do on day one is going to look very different from what you do 3, 10, 3 years down the line. And you want to be able to have something that lets you, that doesn't keep you stuck. And I think in Web3, we've seen a lot of experiences where, it was pretty much a dead end on day one, and there was very little opportunity to build beyond that. And then you just get into this like reinforcing death spiral of, okay, well, I can only onboard degens, and so my design has to continue to cater only to a handful of people. And then we end up with the designs that none of us are that excited to play.
Well said.
Yes.
And I think also kind of leaning into the hype thing, right? I think right now the mindset in this industry is that things move very fast and then they transition also very quickly, right? So mindshare doesn't last very long. So I think it's quite common for people to think that if I never actually end up shipping anything, I'll just keep building hype and I'll get more attention. And then once I ship, that's kind of like the end of the road. But a lot of what SKALE focuses on, and I like that Sam touched on the developer side, right? I think onboarding often gets focused on the end user. But when we work with Sequence, really it's how can we take developers who maybe don't know as much about blockchain or aren't as familiar with how to integrate blockchain or how they can integrate blockchain into their game. And we work with partners like Sequence that provide almost like these plug and play capabilities so that instead of somebody having to figure it out themselves, they can work with SKALE, they can work with our developer relations team, they can work with Sequence and people like Sam to help implement these systems that enable them to get to market a lot faster. And in a way that's been proven out and a proven roadmap for success, so that when they are now focusing on the end user, and that's something that I on the marketing side get to focus on a lot more of, we are looking for that frictionless onboarding, right? So there isn't that, hey, I have to have a wallet, I have to have a gas token in my wallet. I can just quite simply get to the site, download the application, enter in a social login, enter in an email address, get a quick verification code, and I'm good to go. And I'm in and I'm playing and I'm either playing and I'm collecting assets and figuring out if I can sell them in a marketplace, or just playing and seeing how I'm ranking on the on-chain leaderboard or collecting assets. There's a million different things that can be done on-chain. And with zero gas fees, I can dive into a whole lot more stuff on that front, but just speaking to the relationship with Sequence, it's really a chance for a developer to say, I want this experience and I want this tooling that can help me achieve this experience a lot faster and a lot more efficiently than I could beforehand.
Yeah, and I mean, exactly these kind of things I think are adamant to enable and developers to finally get to the point, and that's still the sad point. It's like in Web 2 or in free-to-play especially, over so many years there's a full ecosystem, which is a little bit disrupted by Apple. But besides that, you basically had an onboarding. You not just had a developer tech stack, which was basically complete. So it was really easy to achieve. So you could focus on games, but there was also an ecosystem for onboarding players. So there you have a wonderful funnel. It's lazily you spend $1 and then 5 months later, you know exactly how much money you get out. And so I'm really happy that you guys already taking care of the tech part, because that was the first hurdle that Web3 has to take. First, it is, while it's not rocket science, I mean, it's hard enough, but it's not rocket science. It is still hard enough for a lot of normal game developers to go do all the onboarding and everything when it comes to frictionlessness with wallets and all these kind of things. So, but now for me, this is sadly the thing that is still missing is we need now also being able to have not just the technology mastered, but also the user acquisition. I know that it's a big thing, but user acquisition is part of the funnel. So onboarding is basically, we have, sadly, in this nice, wonderful funnel, there's a lot of small holes. And the hype, the Twitter, the crypto Twitter hype, the never launching, builds up. I mean, this is literally how you build normally premium games. I mean, I'm an old guy, like I said. In premium, you do this. You build up hype, you do the gameplay videos. You basically try to get the highest wish list, and then you release, you get a lot of revenue, and then it goes down. And exactly, that's the problem that we currently have, I think, personally, in Web3, is like, you get hype, and then a lot of games are not able, like you said, to have something after that. You just hype out, and then it just, nothing happens.
In terms of the technology, I would love to have your opinion, every one of you, because when we traveled across the globe for the past 3 years, before that, it was obviously onboarding was a big subject. You know, it still is, but it was something we need to discuss because it's a challenge for a lot of people in the space. I feel like at the beginning, if I remember correctly, at the beginning of last year, 2024, when we had something we call account abstraction, it feels like a lot of new doors opened for any kind of game developers to not to have to understand exactly the kind of subject you said around gas fees, around to everything, the kind of obstacles you could face as a game developers wanting to build in Web3. Do you feel like, I know you're super involved in the gaming development side of it on your side, Sam, I would love to have your opinion on that. Do you feel like account abstraction was the beginning of something which happened, bringing you more opportunities to ease a little bit the kind of process for the game developers to be involved?
Yeah, I think account abstraction and Sequence was obviously at the forefront of creating the standards on which account abstraction run, like ERC 1271 and 6492. So the team thought very early about what are the barriers to user experiences in blockchain technology, especially with something like gaming, where we always have this bar of seamlessness. You know, if you're building, I mean, not even just a casual game, but any kind of game, but you have a couple seconds to get a player into your game and doing something. And if you're spending on user acquisition, those few seconds really matter, because if they bounce out of that, then it's completely wasted money. Account abstraction was one of the big paradigm shifts in Web3, where suddenly we didn't have kind of the old school experience of like a MetaMask and this EOA wallet where you had to first download it and then fund it with crypto so you could pay for gas and do all these other complex things. It was not only removing the tax to players of actually enjoying a blockchain experience, but even then further removing things like transaction signing pop-ups and stuff like that would just break up the experience even more. So I think that was was a big fundamental shift, but it, as with everything in this space, it's still been when you solve one problem, I think developers get very hung up on the technology of it, and they think about, okay, great, well now I can do onboarding, and then they stop thinking about the downstream experience after that. It's like, I'm going to onboard people seamlessly, but I'm going to still send them to a third-party marketplace to do all their trading. So there has to be this like constant re-education on, well, wait a minute, you can actually continue to have like a full-featured player in-game experience, and account abstraction. Really, when you think about it, is just that 0.1 second of initial account creation, and then occasional transactions. That's it. It's everything else that's happening around, surfacing that information in the game and having the game be kind of dynamically and real time updatable based on blockchain information that a lot of developers are still now filling in the blanks of how to do. But it certainly started with, okay, we have to solve account abstraction. And then even today, you look around and a lot of developers still haven't adopted that as best practice. And so, we take a couple inches forward and then a couple steps back and, hope that incredible content creators realize what to do with this technology, which is where, again, we'll work really closely with SKALE to say, together, hey, here's how you should be thinking about things. And then SKALE goes a step further and says, actually, you don't have to worry about gas at any point. And so, we're trying to solve for the same user and developer problems with as many different angles as possible to get them building faster, because anytime they're not, focusing on actual core, game mechanics, then we're not making great progress.
Chris, on your side, how long have you been developing the data isolations and starting to think about the Web3 data of it?
I mean, that was when we first started Desolation, we first focus on gameplay. That's our thing. I mean, it's hard for me to do differently because, I mean, when you're, as long as a game developer, it's just really hard to. It's not my first idea was oh yeah, what's the perfect setup there? And we wanted to raise a bigger round, and then and that's one of the downsides of the whole. So now I think we are now in a really good state when it comes to onboarding, to tech, to all that kind of the ecosystem is now in such a nice state, but now the money is a bit shorter. And we had exactly that problem. It's we came to this 23 slouch where suddenly crypto investments in content like typical games was a bit less. And so we choose then a partner, OpenLoot, they helped us out quite good. And they had basically a lot of the things that you described with a Web2 layer in front of it. And so we basically used them because for us it was the easiest way to do. And this is, I think, the downside that you had is so now finally we have a lot of the tech that we should have needed 3-4 years ago. Because I think that's the weird thing for me, and I know that's probably not always popular when you, but I'm so excited about the Web3 technology, but I have the feeling that a lot of that, oh yeah, that's the best shit in the world, and raising so much money and flooding so much money into the ecosystem, which is per se a great thing, but a lot of that basically vaporized because the tech was not ready, the audience was not ready, so much stuff was not ready, and that's one of the main issues that I basically have with that. So we are finally there with the tech and everything else, and now it's much tougher to raise money again. So yeah, so that's why we basically choose. That was exactly, if we would not have used OpenLoot, if we would have gone had a race or something like that we probably would have loved to work with someone like you guys, because that gives us much more control, it is much more seamless. But again, that was not there yet, and I think that's the only the funny story about Web3, that how I could see it coming in a little bit later to the party. It's just everything is about timing, and it's I mean, business overall is a lot about timing, but here it was even more. And I hope that building slowly, like we had in the panel before, building slowly, not listening to Web3 is gaming is dead and stuff like that. We hopefully get to the point again where they have a steady flow and not a hype-based flow of cash coming in and being able to make cool games.
Love it. You anticipated one of my next questions, so I love it even more. From the perspective of SKALE, when you're actually facing gaming companies who would like to be involved in it, a little bit more in Web3, but they don't know anything about the onboarding process, what kind of conversation you're having with them? How are you trying to solve maybe the issues they have in their head in terms of what they should do with the technology you have?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a little bit of a connotation about what actually is done on chain and what can be put on chain, and there's so many different things that you can do when you have a gas-free blockchain. So if you have multiple levels, you can use, SKALE's random number generator to create levels, different levels. You can matchmaking capabilities. So there's all sort of stuff on-chain file storage. So all sorts of things that you can do to reduce costs other places and put them on-chain. They're immutable. All of those different factors are what we're having conversations about. So it's not just owning an asset. It's not just having a marketplace. It's let's think about all the other factors that go into your game and what can we put on-chain knowing that it's going to live there and you're not going to have to pay for a fee every single time you want to access it. So that's a conversation that we're having with all these different developers. We just actually launched a program where we're going out and targeting specifically indie game developers and teaching them and onboarding them into blockchain and partnering a lot on that with Sequence and the tooling that we can provide and we can work with them on. But the goal of that really is like, hey, blockchain isn't scary. I know it's scary. I know there's connotations about blockchain that it's full of scammers, it's full of people trying to make a quick buck, but that's not the case for the real builders that are out here. And we want to help onboard you into a seamless, invisible experience where you can still go out and target the traditional Web2 gamer, and hopefully we can stop saying Web2 and Web3, and just like get to go out and target the gamer and do all this stuff with, not necessarily hiding everything, putting it in the background, but just sort of like not making it as visible as people currently think it is. And have that be a permanent fixture, right? Like blockchain technology is the tip of the spear of where technology is going. It's kind of like this immovable force, in my opinion, and maybe I'm being a little bit optimistic, but it's going to take a little bit longer than I think everybody wants it to take, but it's going to occur, and you're already starting to see it the past few years at GDC, where there's more and more blockchain that's being exposed, more games are interested in it, more studios are interested in it. The adoption is taking place. It's just not maybe happening as fast in gaming as it is in other industries. But the conversations we're having are about, like, it's not scary. There's a lot of different things we can do. You're not going to hurt your reputation. You're not going to hurt the gamers that you're targeting. We're going to help you continue to grow and even adopt more people, build an even more strong community of people that are going to be interested in playing and becoming evangelists for your project.
Love it. To come back to you, Sam, actually, and I really encourage anyone in the room to actually check every time Sam is actually sharing something in your blog, I mean, so like any kind of article you're releasing, I think it's a mine of information, and I like the kind of involvement you have to a lot of communities like the ape community as an example. I'm not saying that as NFT collectors. I'm saying that as someone who wants to improve the way developers could use it. We always want to avoid friction to game developers and users, and it seems like the more we try to avoid that friction, the more we kind of devaluate a little bit the blockchain aspect of it to make it very easy for everyone to understand first. But on your side, you said it yourself, like, okay, we made it, the kind of traction, but a new subject, marketplace, a new subject, you're working on royalties. So my question will be, how do you find the good balance between user acquisition and user experience and new technology coming from blockchain?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I think that has been true. The applications of new monetization and distribution mechanisms in gaming has always been one where you have to kind of toe the line to figure out the right balance. When you think about even free-to-play game design, like what should be completely free, what should be paid, how do when do you introduce the concept of paying into a game? And every game does that differently. Different games do it in different genres. Player expectations of what that should be on PC versus console versus mobile, even if it's the same player, varies. And so there's no great one-size-fits-all answer. But I think what we hope to see is developers. What excites me is developers who recognize that this is an experiment throughout the life cycle of the game. And developers who are thinking about kind of like a staged approach to what the blockchain means for their games, I think are thinking about it in the right way, in the sense that, you know, you could have a completely free-to-play looking game that is entirely Web3 the day that you launch. But that doesn't necessarily mean that there's secondary trading. That doesn't necessarily mean that there's like interoperability or, you know, expanded utility with assets. But it does mean that as you develop and users kind of you know, sort of exhaust like the original game loop and they start looking for these other experiences, that you can introduce these things that become additive to the player experience. Also recognizing that, you know, not every player is necessarily going to engage in secondary trading, or not every player is going to think about interoperability, other things that you can do with game assets. And so I applaud developers who are like, you know what, we're building for a core audience. We know who our, you know, kind of early user base is going to be, and they, you know, play these kinds of MMOs, and this is the, you know, the general mechanics that they like. And then as the story evolves, as the complexity of the game and its ecosystem evolve, they say, okay, what are the additional aspects that we can introduce? And so, again, it's not necessarily having a plan for all of that on day one, but it's recognizing, one, just the potential, which I think a lot of developers still don't necessarily understand because of their just kind of like previous baggage with what they thought was possible with blockchain technology, but also you know, recognizing that they don't have to necessarily think about every single player profile and you know, segmentation on day one, or at least, you know, have an address for that.
No, I think one of the last questions I would say for you, Chris, the last question would be, you've been involved in the space for quite some time in the gaming industry. Do you feel like we need to learn more a little bit from what you could do in terms of user acquisition in Web2? I know we shouldn't say Web2, Web3. Actually, maybe it's the one thing everyone is saying across panels discussions we're having today, and I agree with you, but you feel like we can learn more from what's possible in gaming as a whole for the Web3 space?
I mean, the main issue, I mean, even on OpenLoot I see that, is like, if there's a game that is well suited for a certain type of audience, and the main issue that we still have, if it's crypto Twitter, or if it's like the core Web3 games and the biggest second market traders, it is a limited audience, and it's the fight that we are fighting since Web3 came big in the spotlight. It's like, that is a limited audience, and we are trying to grow the audience. What happened to us, and it's still happening, is like, we're trying to build the game slowly up, and then our core audience, or the hype people that come to us, come through Discord, they come through Crypto Quitter, they come through the other OpenLoot games. They're asking, when can we do NFTs? When is the token coming? It's like, it's so distracting as a game developer. Constantly, it's like constantly, when can I make money? When can I make money? I know that's not all of them, but it is exactly what happens to us all the time. Like, we wanna, let me first fucking build the game, make sure that it's fun, because that's the main. And then other studios I know that are then in this vicious circle where the last test, and then we do economy, and then we do another test, and be prepared. And it's like hype after hype after hype to just feed these kind of guys, which are early in, and yes, they sometimes drop some good money on you, but but they can get fastly bored, and they can be also very quickly out. They can sell their assets. I mean, that's something we never discuss. One thing that I just had that talk with another Web3 developer. You know what's so great about Web2 games? You can't sell your assets. Because I have players in my games, they spend like 10K. I mean, Dawn of Ages, the biggest whale, spent 15K. This guy doesn't get his assets out. So he plays for now 5 months in a row. He's every day online and stuff like that. And that's the point. It's like, it is very quick. You do one wrong thing in a Web3 game, the security is not perfect. Something comes up what someone doesn't like, whatever. There can be sellouts, there can be, and these kind of things can, and that's the point. It's much easier to make mistakes. And I think that's why tech like you guys do help us at least to make sure that on a tech side it's probably not as fucked, you can't get as much fucked. But again, this is the main thing that I really would love to have is like Web2 is, especially free to play, it's much slower because you get out an early access game, you're getting UA started, you try to understand what is the audience. It's in when you do UA for Web2, it's like you start with a hypothesis, say, okay, we have a medieval game. You have a certain audience, a certain country you've started targeting, and you slowly build to a better understanding. In Web3, it's hard because it's one pool. At the moment, I know it's probably not as simple. I simplified, sorry for that, but it's one pool of people that are really about, okay, what is the coolest shit at the moment? And I think it's very hard then sometimes for the smaller games, the games that are probably didn't get as much money, that didn't get as quick, big and stuff like that. So I think that's something we should learn about, being able to nurture not just the biggest and the greatest games, and we saw so many big games fail. And I think that's something we should learn. That kind of speed. I know it's that makes Web3 exciting, but it's also something that's decremental to it.
For the last question for you, Ben, do you feel like next year, maybe thanks to SKALE, I'm not going to actually set up a panel on onboarding issues, there's going to be something on the past?
Hopefully. I want to comment a little bit on I think, yeah, right? Like I think the Web3 audience, blockchain-based audience right now is very degen focused and by nature. And so when working with a lot of the projects on SKALE, there is that kind of question that gets asked, like, are you trying to onboard degens or are you trying to onboard gamers? And it's not to, discredit whatever direction they're trying to go, but more in terms of like, okay, that's the direction you want to go, whichever one it is. Let's focus on that style of marketing that works for them, because if you're trying to do everything all at once, you're going to get the mixture of the degens coming in asking for everything right away, which is going to scare away the traditional gamer who's like, all right, well, I'm okay with it taking a little bit longer.
Yeah.
And then the path that we've found to be a little bit more successful is going after the traditional gamer, getting them in, getting the fun game aspect to take place, and then starting to institute some of the elements a little bit further down the road. And that's where one of the first games that hit it big on SKALE was one of the smallest ones. It was a single developer. He launched a platformer game. To the point where our whole team kind of played it and we're like, okay, this is fun, but like we didn't really think anything of it because we had projects that had bigger budgets that had come through and said we're going to launch on SKALE and we're going way more into the hype. And then we were looking at the stats week after week after week, and he was running these competitions in his server, and it just kept growing and growing and growing, and to the point where he was one of the top ranked games on Defraire for a little while, and it was just like out of what we thought was out of nowhere, and it was just him leaning into the community of the platformers who liked these style of games, who enjoyed the mechanics that he had put into it, that all of the elements, the blockchain elements were there, but they weren't feeling it. And so it became this thing like, okay, let's try and replicate or at least figure out what his strategy is and how can we do that in all of these different verticals. And it's been something that we've been working on to try and do with all the other projects on SKALE. So hopefully, yes, next year when we're having this panel, the onboarding, the friction is a thing of the past, and it's more of a focus on how are the different gaming verticals within this industry finding success with their targeting, with their marketing, with their user acquisition.
I do not know if the title will change for the next year panel we're going to have, but it needs to be the three of you, so we can actually track everything we said and see each other for in 1 year. But I do appreciate you sharing your feedback and expertise, and thank you very much for attending the panel.
Thank you. Thank you.